This is Michael Woodward, and this is Jumblethink.
T minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Jumblethink, where we interview amazing people about their journey of turning dreams and ideas into reality. Along the way, we're going to share some tips on how you can turn your own dreams and ideas into reality too. On today's show, we're taking questions from Quora. Whether you're a new listener or a longtime fan, if you've never subscribed to Jumblethink, right now is the time to do it. Head on over to your favorite place to listen to podcasts, search for Jumblethink, click that magical subscribe button, and never miss an episode of Jumblethink. Now let's jump into today's show. Hey there, welcome to Jumblethink. My name is Michael Woodward. I am your host. We have a very fun show lined up for you today. Before we do that, we want to thank our friends over at Penji, your source for unlimited graphic design at a low monthly subscription. As a listener of Jumblethink, they are going to give you 15% off your first month when you visit Penji, PENJI.co. Use that code JUMBLE and you'll get 15% off your first month. Now, on today's show, we're doing something a little different. It's something we've done in the past, but we haven't done it in a while, and that's going on over to Quora. And if you're not familiar with what Quora is a place where people can come on, ask people questions, and then the world of the internet can come in and answer those questions. They have a wide range of questions. It could be super technical. It could be about podcasting. It could be about history. It could be about travel. It could be about pop culture. It could be literally about anything. And people can come in, ask their questions, and the crowd comes in and says, you know what? I have an answer for you. I have seen so many really cool questions on there. One of the questions that I saw recently was talking about planes and pilots, and if they had a horn, kind of like trucks or cars have. And it was just a really cool question. So we're going to take some questions around podcasting. We're going to talk about some questions about innovation. We're going to be looking at some questions about all kinds of different things in today's show. You may want to check into the episode notes, because in the episode notes, we're going to actually list what the question is and a time marker. So if you have a specific topic that you're interested in, you can head on over to jumblethink.com, check out the episode notes for this episode. You can also find them on most places you listen to the podcast in the notes for the show. So we're going to have that there. It will make it a little bit easier for you to find the question you are interested in, or maybe just skip through and you can find those topics that you go, oh, that's a cool one, I want to hear it. And this is completely a jumble, a mess of ideas and questions that have been asked. I'm pulling them from all over in Quora. I am a Quora user. I answer a lot of questions on there. So you can head on over to Quora, search for Michael Woodward. You can find me there, or I'll put that link in the episode notes too, so you can get right to the profile. I love answering questions there. It's a lot of fun. Recently, I just answered some questions on Squarespace and Manhattan and podcasting. Running, that's another area I answer a lot of questions on. So I answer a lot of questions from a wide range. I get a lot of requests. And so the questions today are questions where I've actually been asked these questions on Quora and haven't taken the time to answer them yet. I get lots of questions all the time to answer. So that's where these questions are coming from. It's kind of like listener questions. We've done that in the past. We're going to do that again. But these are kind of fun because they're all over the place. And part of Jumblethink is about taking the confusion of ideas, the confusion of questions, and bringing that thought together. So Jumblethink. As I mentioned before, these questions are all over the place. So I'm going to take a crazy one just to kick it off because I think it's a very fun question. The question is, have you ever had an alligator in your pool? All right, first off, I've only had a pool a couple times in my life at the house that I lived at, or apartment. When I was growing up, we did have a pool at our house. It was an above-ground pool, but it was in central Pennsylvania. So if there was an alligator in there, we've got big problems. So no alligator there. Then I did live in Florida for a while. In Pensacola, there were alligators in that area. However, never an alligator in the pool to the best of my knowledge, or whenever I went swimming. So none there. Then I lived in Houston. No alligators there that swam in the pool at my apartment. Northern California, no alligators. So for me, I've never had an alligator in a pool, but I am going to tell a fun little story here. Years ago when I was first dating Jennifer, my wife, we were dating long distance. She lived in St. Louis area. I lived in Northern California. We would travel back and forth a couple times a month to see each other, and we'd visit each other all over the country, meet up for different things, whether it was seeing family or something like that. So one time we were on the phone, and it was later in the afternoon, evening, and I was sitting outside on a friend's orchard, and this cat came up to me, and I wasn't really giving the cat named Lucky any attention whatsoever. And so this cat was pestering me like, hey, pay attention to me. I'm here, and I'm on the phone with Jen, and I'm like, there's this cat that's kind of messing with me, and all of a sudden the cat just attacks me. And this is like a house cat, but the reason the cat's called Lucky is because it only had 3 legs. And so it latches onto my arm, and like I scream, and Jen's like, what's going on? I'm like, I'm being attacked by a cat. And I'm like, I'll call you back. So I finally get the cat off my arm, and I have scratches down my arm, and I have bite marks into my hand. And so while I've never had an alligator in any pool that I've ever lived at, I have been attacked by a 3-legged cat named Lucky. So that's a fun way to answer that question, although not directly answering it because I've never experienced an alligator in my pool. So there's my 3-legged cat story about a cat named Lucky. The next question is an incredibly good question, and I'm excited to answer it. The person writes, I am 20 years old. I have a goal to become financially independent by the age of 30. Can you suggest some business ideas for me? I think this is a great question. However, there are things that you have to do to answer this question before you can ever actually get to the business part. The first thing you have to answer is, what does independent mean to you? I don't think it's really all that difficult to be financially independent at 20 or 25 or 30. So if you are 20 or 21 or 22 and you're kind of living off of somebody else, you need to be thinking about how you can be becoming financially independent. Now, I'm not talking wealthy. I'm just talking about providing for yourself. What that means is that you need to take the time to define what independence looks like for you. Now, this specific person asks to become financially independent. So for them, they need to really define what financial independence looks like, and then what that entails for the rest of their life. They may be going, well, financial independence is making $60,000 a year, and they may be willing to take a job and go get $60,000 a year. Well, great. That's good. Then you have your solution. You know what your goal is for financial independence. You know what that looks like, and you know what you're willing to do with that. Now, other people could be going, I want to start my own business. So financial independence isn't just financially free, but it also means free in the choices of what I build for my businesses. And that's a vastly different question, because how you play that out means that you're building businesses instead of just getting a job. And there's nothing wrong with getting a job or starting a business. They are just uniquely special to the individual. And that individual has to decide for themselves, like, what am I willing to do here to really set up myself for success, for that independence? So the first step, define the independence. Define what that means for you and what that looks like. Not just from a financial standpoint, but pace of life, the things that really mean freedom to you. Define all of that. The second thing is you need to take stock of debt. So if you've gone to college, you have debt that has to be paid off. Now that's going to be part of the weight of financial independence, because you're going to have to be able to pay for that. And you also need to look at the broader sense, not just the debt of what you owe people, but the debt of current bills. So that could be your rent, that could be a car payment, that could be your insurance, it could be a bunch of different things there. So you need to really sit down and come up with what independence would look like for you to just hit zero. Like, this is how much it's going to cost to pay for my college loan. This is how much it's going to pay for rent. This is for my car payment. This is for my insurance. This is for my food. And go down that list and really create a picture of what your debt and what your costs and expenses are. And from there, step 3, you need to create a budget. So if you come in and go, my expenses and my debt to pay all of that each month is $4,000, then you know that you have to make at least $4,000 just to break even. So you have to then get either a job or start a business that's going to be able to generate that amount of income per month. And then you can look at it annually, because if you're starting a business, there may be months where you're like, oh, I'm bringing in $5, $10, $15, $20,000. And then there may be months, maybe in summer, where things slow down, or Christmas season, or wherever that is for your specific business. And so you have to leverage what your cash flow is going to be like throughout the year to understand how to manage that. And then from there, once you have the back picture of what this looks like, what does independence look like? What does debt and your cost of living cost look like? You've created your budget. Then you can start looking at the ideas. Now, if this person's specifically asking, what are businesses I could start, or what are businesses that I could do that would be really good for making money quickly, that's one thing. But in this case, this person wrote by the age of 30. So they're talking 10 years from now, financially independent. So here are a couple industries that I think would be ones to look at. First off would be AI. There's a massive market for that. And if you can understand how to leverage the data, the information that's there, and use AI for businesses, for startups, that is a powerful, powerful place to be able to play. So if you're wanting to start a business or get into an industry, AI is a great one to do it. Virtual reality is a growing space. It's a harder one because I don't think a lot of businesses have figured out how to monetize it and really make it sustainable. And you look at some of the corporations like Facebook that bought out Oculus, and I think that they're struggling with understanding how to leverage the technology. So if you could come in and figure out how to use that technology, that would be good. Robotics, that's another space that you could start figuring out ways to automate things with robotics. And you could actually hybrid that with AI. So using AI and robotics to work on specific tasks that maybe humans can't do, or something like that. A great example of that is if you could go in to the farm industry. Specifically, there was that bust on illegal immigrants in the South recently by the government. Those jobs are really hard and they're very dangerous, and the working conditions are really, really poor. Now, I'm not saying we need to take jobs from people, but maybe you could create a robot based on AI that could come in and solve those problems of how to work in that space, and really use robotics and AI to create a flow so that people aren't processing that chicken. Maybe people lose arms and get hurt and cut and break bones and all kinds of crazy stuff. So if you could figure out how to make it so that those pieces of equipment can do it with AI, then you would be able to go in and create a business that would generate billions of dollars. Another space that is rapidly growing is the need for code. And you could start your own agency around code, maybe as a web developer or designer, but you could also create your own code structures. That's what we look at and see happening with Uber and Lyft and other places. There are software companies that are offering a service. And so you could come in and start thinking about what are the problems people face in those spaces and build businesses around that. Now, on the small business side, people are always going to need coaches. So if you have an area of expertise, even at 20, you can cultivate that by getting a job in a specific career and then become an expert in that, then leverage that knowledge by the time you're 30 to then become an expert to coach or consult with corporations or individuals. And so that's an area where you could go into the workforce for a while and then get autonomy by starting your own business out of that. Other spaces, people are always going to look for insurance. You could be an insurance broker. People are always going to look for financial brokers. That's a little bit harder with E-Trade and with some of the other softwares out there that are doing online banking, or online investing for that matter. Maybe not as safe there. But instead of just giving you a list of different industries, I'm going to give you a challenge if you're listening right now and you go, well, that's me. I'm 20 and I want to be financially independent, but I don't want to go into the workforce from being a captive employee. Well, step back and here are a couple steps you can take. Step number 1, figure out your strengths and abilities. Now, that isn't a cap on where you're going. It does let you know how you need to build a team around you and what's going to work in that space. But if you go, hey, I'm really, really passionate about farming, but I love living in a city, you could do like our friends at Brooklyn Grange did, and you start a farm on a rooftop of a warehouse. Now all of a sudden you have a business that's sustainable, that's doing good, that are using your gifts and passions to build business. So figure out your giftings. What are you good at? What are the things that you're naturally bent to do? Number 2, what are you passionate about? Figure out your passions, the things that make you tick. Step 3, I'm going to say, is to then take and build an idea around that. So if you're passionate about building guitars, how do you build that into a business? Now, let's say you know somebody or you've struggled with your eyes, and so you're passionate about health for eyes. Maybe that's a new technique that goes past laser surgery and does something completely different to help bring healing to those eyes. Well, that may be a place that you could grow a business out of. You need to answer the following question, though. So question number 1 are what are you good at? What are you passionate about? Number 2, what is the need? Number 4, do people want it? So if they don't want it, then you're not going to be able to create a business on it. And if you're not able to create a business on it, then it's not super helpful. So think about those kind of questions when you're asking how you can become financially independent by the time you're 30. This applies to anyone. So if you're 40 and you want to do that in 50, you got to take care of knowing what that means to you. You've got to take care of the debt and your bills to make sure you're covering those. You've got to set a budget so that you can get healthy, and then you can really tap into what makes those things all work together. It may mean becoming a little bit more tight on things until you get through that. But I don't think there's any reason why somebody in their 20s, by the time that they're 30, couldn't be financially independent. And it really comes down to one thing, and that's being intentional. All of these steps, all the things that I just recommended here are all about being intentional, making intentional choices. If you're just like kind of hoping that things will work out, then you're probably not going to have a good game plan. If you don't have a good game plan, then you're not going to see the things you want to happen. So those are my steps for that question. If you're 20 and you have a goal of being financially independent, that's what I would recommend you do. All right, that leads us to question number 3. As I said, these questions are all over the place. So we've talked about a personal thing. We've talked about financially independent. Now we're going to bring it back a little bit personal, but this is a question I hear a lot of people debating right now. The question is, do you think you would buy an ebook? Now listen, when I do this show, I get books sent to me all the time. Sometimes they're physical books, sometimes they're ebooks. I read all of them. However, I prefer reading the paper book. There's just something magical. There's something good about it. I just love having paper books when I'm working on research, when I'm just enjoying reading. There's something nice about being on a flight and not having to worry about if the battery on my device is going to die, or if I'm going to go outside and it's going to be too bright. Now, if you're inside and it's dark, then you got to get a flashlight, so the screen does help there. For me, though, there's something magical about the written book, that paper book. I love the concept of ebooks. I think it's really, really a cool concept. But for me, there's something nostalgic. There's something enjoyable about flipping the page, being able to put the book down, being able to scribble a note in the book if it's appropriate, or dog-earing it if I want to come back to a specific section, or highlighting it. For me, that's just the way I like to read. So if you were to come to my office in Pennsylvania, you would see tons and tons of books all over the place. Some of them are books I'm getting ready to read. Some of the books are books I have read. If I don't enjoy a book, I usually get rid of it. That's just what I do. I usually donate it or go to a share book library where it's one of those little book boxes on the side of a street. And so I usually drop off books there. And so a couple times a year I go through all my books and figure out what I need, what I don't need, and go through those. But for me, real book is the way it's going to be for at least now. I like the concept of ebooks. I just can't get there for some reason to actually make it part of my habit. Maybe I haven't given it enough chance, but always paper, always the real touchable book for me. Question number 4 coming from Quora today is this: how easy is it to start a podcast? It is very easy to start a podcast. You don't even need a mic. You can use your cell phone, you can use Anchor, and you can have a podcast up today. Now, that doesn't mean that that's the best route to do it. Easy and right, or easy and best, are two different things. I've been doing this for 3 years now. I've been working in the audio space for 25 years, 30 years, a long time. I know a lot about technology, but when I started, I had expectations that were unrealistic about the success of the podcast. So tip number one, if you're going to start a podcast, it may be easy from a technical standpoint. All you need is that microphone and a computer, or you just need your phone and Anchor, whatever it is that you're going to use for launching your podcast. From a technical standpoint, the cost of entry is very, very low. We just recently had a guest on. That episode's going to be coming out in the next couple weeks. You're going to be wanting to hear that guest. But in the episode, we talked about how podcasting is actually a very easy thing to get into. It's easy to get into, but it's not easy to do well. There's a difference between just creating podcasts and talking into a mic and creating content people want to listen to, interviewing well. Interviewing is an art or a learning process onto itself. So just because you've launched a podcast and you think you know how to ask questions doesn't mean you do. Now, here's a great example. Early on here at Jumblethink, we had an incredible guest on. The interview went well. I listened back to the interview and overall I'm like, it was pretty good. But if I were to interview that same person now, the interview would be so much stronger. I would ask different questions. I would approach the interview differently. I would be able to pick up on the subtle hints that they're saying in their answer to ask follow-up questions. These are all things that you learn by doing. So when you start a podcast, it may be easy to do, but it may not be something that you're good at. That simply means you need to work at becoming better by honing those skills, by tuning them and making them more effective in what you do. So we do all kinds of pivots and changes every season. Right now, we're getting ready to do another pivot in the next couple months. We're reevaluating what's working, what isn't working, what are the kind of guests that our audience, you the listener, love to hear, what kind of content do our guests enjoy. And we're taking time to really rip apart our show. At times that can be painful because you have to get real honest. Is this working? Do people like it? Why do people keep coming back? What are we missing that we aren't doing? What are things that are bad that we should fix? These are all questions that I'm asking right now. We're 3 years into this. Here's my number one tip that I always give podcasters. Commit to a couple years of doing the show before you ever think that you're going to be successful. For me, we're just starting to hit right now, year 2 3/4, where I thought we'd be in maybe year 1. Now, I wish I could say it would have gone easier or quicker or better, but I'm so excited to have learned what I've learned along the way, grow into new areas, strengthen my ability to talk to guests and interview with the right questions. These are all things that I want to get better at. And if I would have given up instead of having the perseverance to keep on going on, then we wouldn't be doing what we're doing today. And our dreams would have never actually become real in this process. We would have given up just saying it's not easy to get the results we want. It was easy from a technical standpoint. It was easy from a publishing standpoint. Yes, there were questions that had to be answered. Yes, there are things that had to be learned. But overall, the technical pieces were pretty simple. Where it got complicated was building a successful podcast. And that takes a lot of time to do. You listen to NPR and you think, oh, these are great shows. They do such incredible work. These people have been doing this for a long time. They went to college for this. They have been mentored and coached by people who are in the industry for years and years. And they're seasoned and tuned because of that experience. You have to get experience under your belt to have a great podcast. So, yes, it's easy to start a podcast. It is hard to keep going, and it's hard to actually see the success you want. And that's the difference between a podcast that has longevity, is simply being committed to the process, refining, becoming better, growing your audience one person at a time, and continuing on that journey. Well, that brings us questions 1 through 4. I hope you're enjoying today's show so far. We're going to take a little break here, and in a moment, we're going to be back to answer some more of Quora's questions. want to take a moment and thank Penji for sponsoring today's show. Penji helps startups, agencies, small businesses, big corporations, and marketing teams achieve more with unlimited graphic design support at one flat monthly rate. Their easy-to-use online platform pairs you with a professional designer and lets you create as many design projects as you want. Think of it as your monthly subscription to top-notch design with no contracts, no hourly billing, just fast, simple, and affordable graphic design for all of your needs. And because you are a listener of Jumblethink, they are offering you something special. If you use the code JUMBLE, Jumble, you will get 15% off your first month at penji.co. So head on over, penji.co. That's penji.co. Use the code JUMBLE and get 15% off your first month of crazy cool and great graphic design. Now let's jump back into today's show as we answer more questions from Quora. All right, we are back and we're continuing this conversation all about answering questions from Quora. As I mentioned before, Quora is a really cool website where anyone can go and ask any question, and the crowd, being everyone on the internet who goes to Quora, can answer those questions. We've asked 4 questions so far with a wide range, everything from a personal question to financial responsibility to personal taste and podcasting. Now we're going to ask a question about travel. This question is New York going to be less trendy in the future? All right. I'm going to first off assume that we're talking New York City, not New York State. So I think that's a fair assessment and a fair guess. So let's just go with New York City. On top of that, I'm probably going to guess that they're specifically meaning Manhattan, because there's the Bronx, there's Brooklyn, there's Queens, there's Staten Island. And most people, when they think of New York City, they are actually talking about Manhattan and not so much the rest of the boroughs. So the Brooklyn's pretty hopping right now, and the Bronx has some cool stuff going on, and Queens out in Long Island City has some development going on. So there's a lot of cool stuff happening in New York. This is a hard question to ask because there will always be ebbs and flows in the popularity of cities and places. You could look back at the 70s and see how New York was having very financial difficulties, very bad financial difficulties. You can look back to the changes that were made in the city over the last several decades and how that revitalized. And then you can look and see how it's kind of struggling again in some aspects when it comes to infrastructure working well. And you look at how they're maintaining sidewalks and roads, and you just kind of go, it looks like they're hobbling it together. They kind of are. Anyway, all that to say, New York City by far is my favorite place. It's the place that I go to. If I were to start another podcast, it would probably be one focused on Manhattan. There is a lot of questions with millennials if New York City is going to stay as hot and awesome as it's always been. I think this can be traced back to a couple things. Number one, Manhattan and Brooklyn are getting crazy expensive. Not to say that other places aren't getting crazy expensive. You look at Silicon Valley, you look at San Francisco, way expensive because there's a housing crisis. And for that, there is a housing crisis to an extent in New York City. You only have so much land there. You can't do much more with what you have. And so there's always going to be, do we build up? Do we redevelop? How do we make this sustainable? And a lot of people are leaving New York City because of the cost of living here. Taxes, rent, a bunch of other things when it comes to financial and infrastructure. So some people are like, hey, I'm checking out because I can't even afford here. And there are a bunch of people moving to places like Portland and Austin, and even LA is seeing a lot of people leave New York City and go there, relocate there. They're like, better weather, cheaper places to live, just kind of all kinds of crazy things. So that's one thing that's going on. Number two, I think that there are some poor decisions at the state level and at the city level that impact the city. And with that, it's holding back the possibility of what the city could become, whether it's how they treat business or how they are treating people when it comes to kind of that nanny state of what you can and can't do. It's kind of, a lot of people are getting sick of it. They're getting sick of government interference and being overtaxed and their freedom's taken away. And so people are saying, hey, I'm out of here. By the way, I am recording this episode in New York City as I prepare for another round of Podcast Row tomorrow here in the city. So I am sitting right in New York City. I was just down in Times Square. I love the hustle of Times Square. I was down in Penn Station earlier today. I was up by Rockefeller Center earlier today, and there are people out. People are doing business. People are traveling here. I love walking around and hearing all the different languages here. So you have, from a business and a living, quality of living standpoint, a lot of people questioning, is this the place I want to be? I can go somewhere else and pay less, have better quality of life, get paid maybe less than what I get paid here, but it actually turns out to be more because I don't have to deal with some of the taxes or the cost of living. And so a lot of people are checking out. And so I think that New York City's going to go through a little season where it's not as hot here, not as popular here as it has been in the past. That said, I think it will resurge just like it always does. Maybe LA's the hot place to be for a couple of years, or Austin, or even, Florida. There's a bunch of places like Tampa and Fort Lauderdale that are exploding, or you go out to Portland or Seattle and you see some really cool things happening. Denver, another hoppin' city. Nashville, another hoppin' city. And so New York City's kind of competing with that, but New York will always be a trendsetter. And it is a hub of so many things. It is the international hub of North America. I just don't see it losing its credibility overall. It will maybe not be as trendy as it has been in the past, but that will come back as new developments happen. You look at the Hudson Yard development going in on the west side of Manhattan near Midtown. And that's just like a crazy cool development project that's going on. It's going to bring more houses, cool restaurants, great hotels. And you look at that and there's some really good things happening. So where it's trendy in New York, it's going to change. It always does. What is trendy in New York is going to change. But I think that there's something magical that happens here. There's a connectivity, and people will come back to it. People will look at New York as a financial center of the world, a fashion center of the world, a tech sector of the world. Maybe not the leading tech sector, but there's tech here. There's entertainment, whether it's TV production or filming of movies or Broadway. That's all here. And there's amazing museums, whether it's art or history or natural history. There's a lot of cool things going on here. And so I think New York's going through a place where a time in which some things are shifting. It might not be as trendy as it has been and as cool as it has been in the eyes of a lot of millennials. And there are good reasons for that. I think that that's going to self-correct over time, and that will see New York shine again in new light. But right now, I think it is a little less trendy than it was back in the 90s or early 2000s, and we'll see what happens in the next 10 or 15 years. Our next question, pulled from Quora, is this. As a small business owner, what do you outsource? This is such a powerful question, because when I see growth in our company, it's because we grow beyond what I can do. I'm one person. I have limitations of time, energy, knowledge, abilities. And so when I grow the business, we see the business do better. I can look back to when we grew our team from myself to adding one guy and then adding a couple more guys. And then at one point we had a team of 12 people working around us, full and part-time people. And that was really cool. And we could see and do a lot of things that we couldn't do when it was just me. Whether it was the amount of workload, it was the things we were doing because I maybe didn't have the skill sets. And so outsourcing is kind of that, in my opinion, a great way to look at trying out employees or trying out to grow your business. So there's a lot of things that you can outsource. For me, I've outsourced different things at different times. My accounting. Accounting is a great thing to outsource. Hire an expert to manage your accounting. So good. Hiring a business coach to outsource your executive level abilities to give you insights. I see that as outsourcing. It is a mentoring, coaching kind of capability, but they're directly impacting the direction of your business. So I see that as an outsourcing thing. Graphic design is a great thing to outsource, especially if you're a smaller business and you have a lot of graphic design needs. Maybe you have a graphic designer, but they're at like full bore going. And so you go, hey, maybe we'll outsource the graphic design for our social media posts. That's a great place that you can outsource. For us, we've even outsourced some of our development when we have a specific code language that might not be something that we're as fluent in. We need to bring someone else in. We'll outsource our coding. Our receptionist position has been outsourced at times. We had Ruby Receptionist, which is a great tool. You call, or somebody calls into your office, and instead of going to you, it goes to a Ruby receptionist. They can answer questions. They can schedule stuff on your schedule, and they can also patch the person through to you. So it's like having a front desk person without having a front desk person. We actually had Ruby Receptionist and a front desk person for a while at the same time. So that was kind of interesting because it was a hybrid, and that allowed us to let our receptionist, our front desk person, do different things than what they did for the Ruby Receptionist. So we outsourced that. Other things you can outsource is your scheduling. So right now, that's one of the things that I'm thinking about outsourcing is when we need to book someone as a guest, have someone that's what they do, a virtual assistant that is my right-hand person that does those kind of follow-ups. Another thing that they can do is they could do client follow-ups. We do a quote or something. They can say, hey, just checking in for Mike. We'd love to continue the conversation. And so that's another thing you can outsource. There's lots and lots of things you can outsource. But if you're getting to the place where you're the bottleneck in your business, you do need to think about where you can offload some of the roles you have. And I would say things that you're not necessarily good at or your strengths, maybe outsource those things off to a virtual assistant or to a place like on FreeUp. They can help connect you with the right people. Now, I will say this. Some of the roles that we're thinking about outsourcing right now, we'd love to hire a social media manager that manages our social media for us. That's something that's on the docket. It's something that I do. I don't do it well. I don't have the time to do it. I can give them the creative pieces, but just scheduling and getting it done right and having the strategy, not something I'm great at. So I want to outsource that. Possibly the editing of the shows, outsourcing that. I'd love to hire a video director to do video for us for the show and turn the podcast into a video format too, so that we have the content being used in different ways. So all of these are things that we want to outsource as we grow, things that I'm not necessarily great at or have time to do because of my other responsibilities. And so those, as a small business owner, are some of the things that I outsource. We also outsource our legal needs. There's no reason for me to write up documentation for my S Corp or for anything else I need to do that requires legal kind of stuff. So we have attorneys that we work with to do that. Those are the things that we outsource. I think that outsourcing is a good thing if you get the right people to outsource to. So think of that too. Who are you sourcing to? That's going to make a huge, huge difference. Before we take another break, I'm going to answer one more core question. That core question is this: what do you do to pass the time on a long commute? Really fun question. There are a lot of answers to that. I don't do a lot of traditional commuting. I'm not driving to work every day. My office is in my house. I'm not driving to meetings far off all that often. When I do travel and when I do commute, it is a longer commute. So what does that look like for me? That may mean that I'm taking an Amtrak train from Pennsylvania up to New York City. May mean like today that I drove up to New Jersey so that I could ride a train into New York City to go to meetings. It may mean like early last week, I jumped on a plane in Washington, D.C. and flew from there to L.A. for an interview that's going to be coming up, and it's going to be one you want to make sure to hear. So, by the way, go on over jumblethink.com, sign up for the newsletter. We have a killer interview coming up that you will want to hear. So sign up for the newsletter and you'll hear about that first. All that to say, my commutes look different than the average commuter. But I think you can take away some of the things I do, whether it's a short commute or a long commute that you have, that can help. So one thing I do is I listen to podcasts. And I listen to a wide range of podcasts. I listen to LeVar Burton's podcast, LeVar Burton Reads. And that one's a super fun one because it's fictional. I listen to Beyond Bourbon Street, which is all about New Orleans. I think it's an amazing, amazing podcast about travel. I listen to Ministry of Ideas, which is just this cool podcast about faith and ideas around religion and how that plays out into life. And of course, one of my favorite podcasters is James Altucher, who I get to see tomorrow at Podcast Row. Super excited to see him again. All that to say, he is one of my favorite podcasts to listen to. I also, one final one, listen to The Moth. I love The Moth. I love the power of story and how story and narrative can play out. So The Moth is just a really, really good podcast. Those are the kind of podcasts I might listen to on a commute or on a trip. That's one place I go. I don't listen to podcasts as much as people would guess being a podcaster. I do listen to podcasts, but it's sporadic. And so I might take an episode or two in a week. And then the rest of the time when I'm commuting or even when I'm working and doing things, I just have music on, a wide range of music. So it could be jazz, it could be Christmas music, even year-round. It could be worship music from people like Hillsong or Elevation or Mosaic. It could be just fun old music or current music. I've been listening to a lot of kind of ethereal music, which is just a lot of fun because it's atmospheric, and I love that. So that's another thing I do. Another thing I do when I travel or when I'm commuting and I don't have to drive is that I read a lot. So right now I'm reading a book by Smith Wigglesworth. And so when I traveled to LA, pulled out the book and I was able to read that on the plane when maybe my battery died, although it didn't die on this trip, which was awesome. But on some trips, battery dies and there's not a place to plug in a computer or a phone. So I'll plug in, I'll unplug and I'll pull out the book I'm reading and start reading that book. The other thing I do is I just sit in silence and I pull out pen and paper and I just write. What am I processing? What are the problems I'm facing? What are the questions I have? What are the things I'm celebrating? What are the things I'm wrestling with? And I answer those questions and just journal for a while. And that's a great time to fill, a great way to fill the time as you commute. It's just processing life. One of the other places that I do that a lot is running, because you're obviously not going to be doing all that much when you're running. You're either going to be listening to something or you're going to be contemplating. Maybe you're with friends and you're talking. So those are kind of your options. So contemplation while I commute is really, really good. And I observe. So if I'm commuting in a place that's filled with people, like the subway, I will just watch people. What are they doing? What's happening around me? What are people processing? What do they look like? I just look around and kind of observe. And then finally, one of the other things I do is I work. So a lot of the places that I commute on, whether it's Amtrak or an airplane, has Wi-Fi. So I jump on the Wi-Fi and I'll work while I do it. So those are some of the things I do to pass the time while commuting. Depending on the way you commute, whether you're driving or you're being transported through a plane, train, or even an Uber or a subway, you can take one of those and probably use them, or many of those philosophies of commuting and things you do. So I hope that helps you in the question of what do I do to pass the time while I commute? All right, so we're going to take a break right here, and in a moment we'll be back for our final segment, answering some questions from Quora. Here at Jumblethink, we have a simple belief that all of us are created for something special, that all of us have dreams and ideas worth chasing. For some, it may mean going and getting a job. For others, though, it means chasing a different path. And often they don't choose to move forward because of fear or obstacles that they have to face. Now, I want to ask for your help today. We would love for more people to hear that message, that they were created for something amazing and that their dreams and ideas matter. If you resonate with that, maybe share today's episode or your favorite episode of Jumblethink with a friend, a family member, a coworker, somebody that you hear them always talking about. One day they'll go do something awesome. One day that dream and idea will become a reality. Maybe it's that person that you always bump into at the water cooler at work. At lunch, you talk to them and they're talking about the ideas that they have, and yet they never chase them. Tell them about Jumblethink. Let them know about how Jumblethink is here to help, how we love encouraging people to turn those dreams and ideas into reality. So that's our big ask for you today. Thank you so much for helping us out. It means the world to me that you would listen, and I'm honored that you would share our show with your friends, your family, your coworkers, or anyone else you may know who will be impacted by the message of Jumblethink. Now let's jump back into today's episode as we do something a little different and answer questions from Quora.
Portée de votre main. Levez seulement le bras pour mettre l'aiguille sur le disque. Mettez le compteur.
All right, we are back for our final segment as we continue to answer questions from Quora. I hope that you're enjoying today's show. Drop me an email, hello@Jumblethink. Let me know what you think about this kind of episode. It's something a little different. It's a little like listener questions, but a little bit different. I hope you're enjoying it, and I hope that you're finding it entertaining and also potentially answering some of the questions that you're struggling with too. We're going to go ahead and move on to question number 8 for today. This question is, how do I create a tagline for my business? I actually like this question a lot because a tagline at its simplest form encapsulates everything about what you do. It makes it easy for people to go, oh, I get it. Nike is just do it. And what they're saying is, because of our shoes, you can just do it. You can go running, you can go climbing, you can go biking because our products help you do it. When I was thinking about a tagline for Jumblethink, I really came back to what is Jumblethink all about? What is it that we do? Whether it's through the podcast, through idea camps, through the consulting, it's all about story, about the story of. But the story of what? And for us, it's the story of ideas. If you are a startup, you are creating the story of your idea. If you are an actor, you are turning an idea into a story. If you are a CEO of a company, you're turning that business into a story. It's creating a new narrative. When you are a mom or dad, you're creating a new story by the children that you parent. Jumblethink is all about ideas. And so for us, when we chose a tagline, we came back to the very simplest but most understandable form of what we do and created our tagline around that. Jumblethink is the story of ideas. All right, so that doesn't really answer how do I create a tagline for my business. All right, how do you do that? Well, think about your business. What is it that you do? That may not be actually the best tagline. You may go, we build computers. Well, that could be good. Apple's a great example of that. It's not necessarily a tagline specifically, but every time you see them talking about a product or a service or something that they're doing, they bring it back to, we enable you to create. Their tagline or the message that they're sharing answers this question. How is this iPad, how is this MacBook Pro, how is this iMac going to help make me create what I envision in my head? So they're not talking about we build computers. They're talking about what the computer can do for you and that messaging. For you, yes, you may do something awesome and you may build an awesome product. But your tagline may actually be better if it tells the story of what it does for your audience. The more you can draw your audience into the story you're trying to tell, the more you can make it personal to them, the more that they're going to engage with your brand, with your product, your service, your message. And ultimately, that's the goal with how you communicate. So for us, we are the story of ideas. Well, whose story? We are the story of entrepreneurs. We're the story of actors. We're the story of writers. We're the story of everyday people who are turning ideas and dreams into amazing things. So we are the story of ideas. Now, for you, when you're trying to create a tagline for your business, try to come back to that simplest form. What is it that you're doing? Here's a simple exercise you can do. Take out a pen and paper and just start writing down all the things that you're doing, things that could be in a tagline. Like, we help people understand their business. We help people book the best tickets for their airfare. We help individuals do. We help businesses. We do this. We do that. Just start writing and then start trying to craft a little story in a one-line sentence. Boil everything down to the simplest form. IBM, it's just think. Apple, it's think differently. You can look at that and you can see how you can take something and boil it down to the simplest form. And it communicates what you're all about as a brand, as a business. So if you're trying to create a tagline for a business, try to boil it down to that simplest question you can answer. And when people go to your website or wherever they're seeing it and they're seeing that tagline, they're just like, oh, I get it. And they're into your story. They're already in and engaged with you. And for our last question from Quora today, that takes us to question number 9. The question is, what does it mean to run a company like a startup? This is a fun question because there are many different philosophies of running businesses. Whether it's an entrepreneurial endeavor, whether it's a traditional business, there are lots of approaches to it. We hear about the lean startup. And in this case, I think that's probably what the question is alluding to. What's the difference between a regular company and a startup? Well, startups face a lot of unique problems. Funding, the amount of team that they have, the longevity that they've been around, the track record they have. They're always proving themselves. They're always trying to survive in a lot of ways. And in that, there's a lot of power because you have to know what you're going to do. You have to be intentional about what you're doing. Whereas some businesses that are established and have been around for a long time and they have a lot of capital, they just kind of can come in and say, like maybe Google, hey, we're just going to throw some money at this and see what happens. If a startup were to do that, that could be the end of the startup. So to run a business like a startup is to be kind of shrewd in some ways. First off, you have to be lean, which means that you have to cut away all the fat, all the extras, all the stuff that dilutes the core of what you do. So to run a company like a startup means to cut away everything that doesn't matter and hyper focus on the core of your business. So you have to be lean. You have to be agile. And agile simply means the ability to move quickly and easily. A lot of big businesses get so focused, tied down to trends that they have to follow or status quo kind of moments where it's like, this is the way we always do it. And with startups, they're very agile because things are going to fail, things are going to succeed, and they have to be able to pivot and grow and change rapidly in that process while they're doing that journey of building their business. And so for a company that's been around for a long time, being more agile means that if they have a system or a product or service that's been static for a long time, maybe they're evolving it and changing it and growing it and reimagining it for the future. So in that, all we're saying is for a company to be run like a startup, they need to be agile. They need to be able to move quickly and respond to the things that they're seeing, experiencing, and doing so that they can get to where they need to go. Startups are also bare bones. You're not going to see a lot of bloat there unless they have a lot of capital behind them. And for a lot of companies, they are starting from that bootstrap mentality where they are literally just financing it on their own, maybe a little bit of capital from outside, and they don't have a lot of money to flourish from the beginning. So they have to be frugal in the decisions they make. With a lot of corporations and businesses that have been around for a long time, they have the flexibility of having that capital. So a company that's running like a startup may act like they're bootstrapping. This could be for an internal project even. Let's say it's a company that's been around for 100 years and they work in a specific industry, let's say shoe manufacturing, and they want to start moving away from leather-soled shoes to add rubber shoes. And instead of going out and getting a loan to do that and everything like that, they may self-finance, and they may go, we have $100,000 to retool and do all the things we need to do to get the new equipment and everything and systems and structures for what we're doing to make that pivot. Well, they may want to approach it like a startup and say, you know what, how can we do this with the bare bones and see if there's a proof of concept here to see if it works, and then we can grow it out. For a company maybe like Apple, they may come in and go, you know what would be kind of cool? I think this like having a watch that does everything that your phone does, that'd be kind of cool. And they may come in and say, yeah, we want to see if this is something worth doing. And they may go bare bones on that to make it something that they roll out. And it's kind of like a startup within a corporation, where they may say, hey, this division is a startup within Apple to do this product, service, or message that they're sharing. And so they're going to go bare bones in that. And then one last thought is, to run a company like a startup, they may change their focus. So a lot of companies are focused on maintaining. We've got to keep a certain amount of cash flow coming in. We've got to maintain the products. We've got to maintain our audience or our customer base. And so they're focused on maintaining what they already have. Startups don't have anything. So they're always looking at growth and innovation. They're always looking for what could be, not what is. And so for a company, they may come in and say, you know what? Let's start thinking more like a startup and start being a little bit more innovation or growth focused instead of maintaining the business. So for them, that may be what it means to run a company like a startup. Now, I know I said that we were on our last question. That was question number 9, but I'm going to throw in one wild card question. I saw this one pop up as I was going through my feed on Quora about a question that was requested for me to answer. I ask this in a different way in rapid fire questions with our guests. I ask our guests, what is one lie about entrepreneurship you'd like to break? And there are so many different lies or misconceptions about entrepreneurship that people have. This person asked the question this way, though. They said, what are most people unaware of about being an entrepreneur? That is a really important question that we need to be talking about more, specifically in the gig economy. Specifically with a lot of people trying to be influencers, a lot of people trying to make a mark in their space. Entrepreneurship isn't for everyone. Now, I think everyone could be an entrepreneur, but some people don't actually have the commitment to do it. It is really, really hard. It is really, really scary. A lot of times you don't know where the next meal might come from when things are in that early entrepreneurial journey, or your rent is going to get paid. And that's scary because entrepreneurship is a massive, massive risk. People think, oh, these people, they must have a lot of money. A lot of entrepreneurs don't start out with money. They weren't born from money. They are born into money. They are people who are making this journey on their own. They may come from an immigrant family. A lot of immigrants are entrepreneurs, or their families are. People don't realize that. The reality is it's a lot harder, it's a lot scarier, and that you're not going to succeed the first time you try. Or if you do, it's not going to be the success you expected. And it's going to grow and change and evolve. And at the end of the day, even though it's hard, even though there's a lot of unknown, even though it is not as glamorous as people think, for me, it is worth it. So I'd love to hear what you think about these questions. We asked you 10 questions today about a wide range of things. I'd love to hear your stories. Drop me a note, hello@jumblethink.com. Leave us a comment at any of our social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter. And let us know what you think. What do you think about all of these questions, and how would you have answered them differently? Or do you agree with me? I'd love to hear what you have to think. Now, that does it for today's show. We want to thank you for tuning in. It means the world to us that you would listen. I hope that today's show has encouraged you, given you some unique thoughts on weird and random questions. But now it's your turn. We believe you were created for something awesome, that you have a purpose, that you have a destiny, and you have a dream. That's what our show is all about. That's why we talk to the people we talk to. So get out there, be encouraged today, dream big, and change the world around you.
Que vous serez maître de votre corps, vous pourrez vous décontracter même en travaillant.